Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Soon Yu. He's a best-selling author of Iconic Advantage and Friction. He has been a consultant for quite some time and a speaker for SCY Advantage Corp. And yeah, also professor, spent time at companies like Bain, Clorox Company, and Chiquita. That is the bananas that I like so much when I'm in Canada. I don't think they have them here in Mexico. This podcast is brought to you by podper.com. That is my podcasting company. If you want to start a podcast, if you want to be invited to other podcasts, if you want to start your pod, for example, we help you monetize through YouTube, but also finding sponsors like these guys here, Qualia, that sponsor this actual podcast. So if you want to optimize your brain as a busy entrepreneur, increase your focus, memory, and drive, go to neurohacker.com/CEO wisdom. Soon, welcome to the podcast. Tell me a bit more about yourself, what you've been up to lately.
Well, thank you, Charles, for having me on. What have I been up to lately? I've actually been in the midst of launching my own podcast, a little slightly different than yours. I think ours is a little more focused on the Asian AAPI community, and really trying to tackle the issue of failure, and actually having some very iconic Asian guests talk about the time they looked in the mirror and they didn't like what they saw and when they hit rock bottom. So we're about to launch that in September. It's called Aconic. And obviously, we're taking a big inspiration from you, Charles, since you've been probably the seed or the inspiration for your own podcast. But I'm sure many of your guests, and so I know you're a big, I think, proponent of podcasts. And so, anyway, taking a page from you.
And failure. I love talking about failures. What have been some of your failures? What have you learned from them?
So I actually have a scorecard of my failures. In fact, I begin every keynote I do with this scorecard of failure that starts with a bunch of numbers. And so there are 5 or 6 numbers on it, and I'll share those with you. And the first one is the number 4, and now actually probably be 5. And it says next to it, career restarts. And it's a euphemism for what I really meant is I actually got fired. I got canned. I got laid off. And I was out looking for another job for 6 or 12 months after those so-called career restarts. I've had 6 situations where I've actually had to look across the table and have had to actually lay people off. And so that's actually really hard to do layoffs. I've had over 30 product failures, some in the $30 million range. So epic product failures. And then the last number on my scorecard is the number 300. And everyone goes, "Oh, that's a big number," but because all the other numbers don't quite compare. And I said, "No, it's actually rather a small number. It is actually, you're in Mexico, you may not have this, but in the US, we have something called our credit score. And most people are in the 700 to 800 range, and 300 is the basement. You can't go below 300. And I've been able to proudly reach 300 twice. So, talk about failures. I've had quite a few.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because it seems that, yeah, it's like the system that gives you these failure, right? Like, oh, a credit score is applied to you. I think these credit score there's bullshit. I'm actually gonna start my own bank in the next decade. I also think that being employed is unscalable. Like, I mean, the probability of you being fired increases with time. It's probably around 98% at the 10-year mark. So interesting, yeah, how some people that put themselves higher than you like impose or label some tags on you, and then people think their failures as a result from the society that we live in. What have you learned from these failures? Because it seems that you became a consultant after that, quite the successful speaker as well, and gained financial independence after that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And obviously, we're trying to address that with our podcast. And I'm glad you're trying to address it with this question and obviously your podcast. I think the key is there's a couple of real major benefits from the idea of so-called quote unquote failure, right? It's all defined by other people, not necessarily, in some ways it's about learning, right? And if you treat yourself like a prototype, most prototypes fail at some point as you go into an improved version, right? And I think the same is true for humans. If we can really view ourselves as prototypes, then we understand the idea of failing is actually the process of taking ourselves to a certain limit and realizing that we've gone to the limits of that version, and then we need to potentially learn from what could be improved and make a new version, right? So it's this idea of versioning and prototyping. So a couple things happen when you fail. One is, yeah, you feel like shit. Excuse my language. You don't feel good. You feel disappointed. But it's important in life to deal with disappointment. It's important in life to deal with the idea that you wanted something, you didn't get it, and how you bounce back from that teaches you resiliency. It teaches you motivation. It teaches you self-reliance because you're the one going through it. And, no one else is going to be able to share that disappointment as much as you have. So I think that's one thing is being able to, I think, process disappointment and then ideally be able to use it as motivation to then go to the next thing you're going after. So that's one of the benefits of failure. I think the other is if you have the courage to actually go back and look at what went wrong and have an honest self-assessment, then you have an opportunity to actually have more information than other people do about what could be improved, what could be changed, or what honestly that you want to stay away from just because it's not something I enjoy, right? So these are all potential opportunities to learn. So that's a big, I think, another benefit of failure. And the probably third thing I'd say is this: if you fail often enough, then you probably also have a certain thick skin, and it gives you more, I think, courage or oomph to go after new things and try new things or be more bold. And so that's allowed me to kind of take many different avenues, try many different things, and otherwise I think if you never fail, then what happens is you become risk adverse and you tend to stay in a very narrow path. So yeah, I think failure has a lot of benefits.
It does. Your books and yeah, your speaking gig. Let's talk about the books for a moment. How hard was it to come up with these books, and what have you learned writing these?
Sure. So, how hard is it to come up with the topic and to actually write it? Topics, I think if you're a curious person, you're always kind of like saying, hey, I'm kind of, what is it here that I'm processing or I'm learning? Is that something that other people can benefit from? And I would say 9 out of 10 people I meet have done something, learned something, experienced something that they realize other people could benefit from. Does that constitute a book? Well, if you can string together 4 or 5 examples of that in your life or from people that you've learned from, then the answer is probably yes. Okay. Because I don't think there's any book topic out there that's truly original. There's always elements stolen from everywhere, right? But all you need is 1% of the people that want to learn from you. You're going to have a huge business. Now, the process of getting it down on paper and outlining it and then writing the so-called prose and the stories that go along with it, it's actually a lot easier now. You got ChatGPT, you got so many different things that can make writing a book happen literally in a couple of weeks, where I think it took me my first book about a year and a half. And I think now with all the technology available to you, you could probably do it in a month or two.
And tell me about the iconic advantage itself, like the brands that we all remember, the BMW grill, the Nike Air. Tell me about the content of the book itself and the power of branding.
Sure. So there are certain brands that have been able to stand the test of time, and not only stand the test of time, have become sort of the, I would call it the standard bearer for a certain benefit that everybody loves about that brand. And they've been able to not only become the standard bearer, they've become iconic because of it. So I'm going to throw out maybe a less known brand. Well, actually, pretty well known brand, but one that maybe not as storied as a BMW. But let's take a beer. Let's take a yellow beer that somehow became the iconic beer for vacation beer, for beach beer, and that is Corona, right? And their key is that um, every Corona has a lime in the neck. In fact, it's almost naked without that lime. And they've been able to figure out how to, when somebody sees that lime and the yellow beer, it automatically signals it's vacation time, it's beach time. And they've been able to own that. So the whole book is really about the idea of how do certain brands not only stand the test of time, but become known for something that allows them to own a key benefit in the category. And so we reverse engineer how to do that in the book. You know, it starts with a very strong brand DNA, knowing who you are and what you're about. And then it's really about the idea of how do you take your strong brand or DNA and translate it into what I call signatures, things that people, when they see, they automatically think back not only to your brand, but to that key benefit, just like that lime in the neck of the beer. And so a book talks a lot about how to create great signature elements, the swoosh, the little air pocket in the Nike Air Max, right? You know automatically that stands for buoyancy, right? There's so many different things that when you see, like if I was to say to you, what's the iconic color for Ferrari? You'd say what?
Red.
Yes. And if I said, okay, oh, let's stick with colors. Let's say there's brown, there's blue and orange, and then there is I guess still around yellow and red. There are three different competitors. Do you know who they are?
Right. And in cars, it's interesting. I guess like McLaren is bright orange, Rolls-Royce is the silver gray angel, Mercedes silver star. Yeah, the BMW grill is interesting though. Like I think it was featured in your book, but I think it's being more copied nowadays.
Yeah, you know, it's so important to the BMW brand that even with their, and you know, it's functional. When they originally did the grill, it was because it's supposed to cool the engine, right? They're air-cooled engines, right? Um, and now they have batteries. They don't need cooling, right? And the batteries are in the bottom of the car. They're not in the front anymore, right? They're like you're sitting on your batteries, right? So, but they still put the grill there. And even with the new i-Series, they have something that is mimicking their kidney grill because it's such an iconic signature for the brand. By the way, those brown and blue and orange, and then the yellow and red, that's UPS, FedEx, and DHL.
Huh,
That's their so-called
interesting.
signature. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
DHL, yellow and red. How could one not know? UPS, I'm guessing I'm not using these as much, but yeah, FedEx, orange and
Blue.
purple
Yeah,
and
purple.
blue.
Actually, it's purple. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's blue,
purple.
purple. You're right. It's purple. It's probably purple. Yep.
Interesting. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
anyway,
brands.
colors, signature experiences, signature, just there's all these different ways to create great signatures. So the great brands really develop strong signatures. In fact, I worked with an incredible brand, Nike, and when we looked at their business, we saw that they had maybe 40 plus signatures, but majority of them were in their men's and footwear. And they were launching into women's and apparel. And they realized that in order to be successful with women's and apparel, they needed to create more signatures in those different segments. And that's how important signatures have become for many of the brands out there. So yeah, that's what iconic advantage really pulls apart is this idea of do you have great noticing power and great staying power?
Right. And the Chiquita one on your LinkedIn, the blue sticker on the yellow banana. It's quite noticeable. It's cool also that they brand their bananas, right? So that
Yeah.
people know. I'm not sure. I don't think they have one sticker per banana. I think it's like per the whole pack. But yeah, that's an interesting business. I think there was a book about the Banana King or whatever. Not sure if it was Chiquita or another fruit company, but yeah, need to study that. How did that company came about?
Yeah, well, the bananas, pretty much a commodity, and you're right. It's like, how do you brand something that's a commodity? And Chiquita figured out a way to do that, which is amazing. And it is that one the sticker. And then there are probably a couple per bunch because sometimes people break the bunches, so you don't want to, but there maybe not in every banana. It was so iconic that they actually had a contest for people for me and you to design banana stickers, and they actually the winners actually got to see their designs on the bananas.
Quite interesting. Nike's one of my favorite brands as well. Nowadays, I think their Pegasus shoes are of my favorite, and they have that fan icon. It's like speed. It's like I think it refers to the fact that they've been tested in a wind tunnel,
I don't.
which is quite interesting. It's always nice, very nice branding. Like Nike shoes are always the best looking, not always the best performing, in my opinion, but yeah, Nike has grown into such a brand. Have you studied Phil Knight and how he grew his empire to that size?
Well, there's a whole movie on it. I think, isn't it? Was it Ben Affleck and Matt Damon? They did. So I would go and watch that movie. You want to know how the inspiration. I mean, their big stroke of genius was two things. One is they created these signature elements, but they also honestly found important people to endorse him, right? And they were just a little bit of luck and a lot of brights to say, let's go after Michael Jordan, right? Way before he became big. And let's not only take advantage of his endorsement, but what about what he does that we could potentially put onto this shoe? And remember that thing where he's, he's about to dunk and his feet are apart? The Air Jordans. I mean, that is an incredible feat of branding where they not only took an incredible icon, but they were able to create a silhouette that also not only communicated that icon, but what that icon was good at.
Yeah, and lessons on my end is that it took around 10 to 15 years for them to get to Jordan and really explode. It takes a lot of time to catch a star, and you need to be there at the right moment, at the right time, and you need to execute flawlessly. Forgot the name of the agents that got Jordan, but yeah, he was competing against other brands, right? I believe it was Adidas and yeah, other fierce competitors that wanted in the game. So yeah, great movie, great book. I believe it's called Shoe Knight, right? Shoe
I
Knight?
don't
No,
remember what
Shoe
it's called,
Dog.
but Shoe
Shoe,
Dog was it? Yeah, Shoe
yeah,
Dog.
Shoe Dog
Yeah.
by Phil Knight. So it was close. Now, what other brands have you worked with lately, and how can you take a startup from 0 to 1 in terms of branding and their signatures?
Sure. I mean, I've worked with a lot of different tech brands recently, like DocuSign, like HubSpot, a whole bunch of really important, big sort of tech brands. I think with tech brands is really exciting because their world changes so fast, so dynamically, right? But the key is for them to own something very unique about their experience, and so each one has. When with the DocuSign, it's really the idea of the signature and that's signing moment, and with HubSpot it's this idea that it's something that is actually available, no matter what. In fact, the smaller the business is, it actually works really well. So I think in the idea of working with brands, the thing I've been really trying to help brands think about is when they're creating signature, especially signature experiences, they really need to think about this idea of adding in friction. Okay. And that was my second book, Friction. And it's really this idea that not all friction is created equal. We have a world that's chasing this whole pursuit of becoming frictionless, becoming seamless, becoming convenient, becoming easy. And I argue that there's a lot of bad friction, stuff that creates anxiety or frustration or uncertainty. You get rid of that. But there's also a lot of good friction that creates happy chemicals like dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, and adrenaline. And you want to make sure that you're actually engaging your customers in a way where you're asking more of them. And in asking more of them, it actually creates those happy chemicals. So actually, sometimes you're better off making your customers work harder, not less, in order for them to stay engaged in the brand. So that's what I've been helping businesses really think about is how do you create great signature experiences by engaging your customers in a way where you demand their time, you demand their attention, and you demand their energy and effort.
Love that. Now, the podcast itself, tell me about the Asian community, because to me, it looks like Asian entrepreneurs are of the most successful in the US. We're talking about Sundar Pichai at the head of Google. And yeah, typically they're also the highest income earners. Why focus on that community, and why a podcast as a concept?
Sure. So what happened was pre-pandemic, I was volunteering at my alma mater, which is the Stanford Business School, and was part of the Asian alumni chapter. And one of the things I was doing was a lot of fireside chats or hosting a lot of panels. And it was great. We bring in some really wonderful guests like Eric Yuan, the CEO of Zoom, people like that. And they would come, we'd interview them, but it'd only be available to one, local people, and number two, the alumni of the Stanford Business School. Then the pandemic hit, and we realized, well, we can't do this in person. We're going to do it online. And guess what? Let's just open it up, and maybe other people could benefit from the discussions, the learnings, the tips shared, all that. And in fact, we started getting audiences of a few hundred people, and they were not all from the business school. And that opened our eyes to the idea that, a lot of people could benefit from great stories from the people you just mentioned, right? People who have been very successful. What could they learn from them, and what type of mentorship could those people provide in the form of a podcast? And that's how we actually got inspired to launch Aconic, the podcast focused on um, iconic Asian leaders. Um, we decided to take a twist. We weren't only going to celebrate the wins. We actually really wanted to understand the true learnings, right? Where the moments that they fell on their face, they got, they really hit rock bottom. And what did they do to climb out of that? Because we felt not everyone can be the owner of the Brooklyn Nets like Joe Tsai, okay? But Joe Tsai, like everybody's fallen down before. We all share the idea that we've fallen down. So why don't we talk about that? Because maybe not every listener is going to be a CEO, but they're all going to encounter difficulty. And if we can all collectively learn from each other's ability to overcome those difficulties, the better we're going to become.
And aren't there already enough podcasts out there? How are you gonna make yours different and brandable?
Yeah, like I said, well, you can actually see our guest list if you go to aconicpodcast.com right now. And there's a couple things I think that are very distinguishing. I've already recorded, I think, 8 episodes, and we're launching in September. We have incredible guests: the CEO of KKR, the CEO of Ancestry, the CEO of Rothy's, the CEO of Open Table, a bunch of really good CEOs. We have really incredible mayors, like the mayor of Boston, the mayor of Cincinnati, Andrew Yang, former candidate, presidential candidate. So, and founder of YouTube, and Miss Asia USA. So we've got actually a lot of really cool guests. So that's first. We got really incredible guests because we're partnering not only with the Stanford Asian Alumni Chapter, we're also partnering with the Asian American Foundation, which is kind of like the Anti-Defamation League or the NAACP for the Asian community. That's allowed us to really tap into what I call incredible guests. But the second thing is these incredible guests are talking about their failures, which there's not podcasts, especially in the Asian community, focused on the idea of failure. With the Asian community, what you'll find is that failure tends to be a taboo topic. And so we actually wanted to tackle that taboo, and that will allow us, to your point, to provide something new.
Right. And the Asian community has suffered from racism at various points in history, the Japanese Second World War, I guess every pandemic that have spread, the COVID for sure, and now with China as a competitor to the US for the greatest world's power. So have you felt that in the last couple of years?
Oh, yes. I think this idea of Asian hate, it did it get exacerbated because of the previous administration's focus on sort of pointing the finger at the Asian community, specifically, obviously, at China, but then guilt through association. And that spawned on a lot of violence to the community. And that's why actually TAF was formed. The Asian American Foundation was formed based on responding to that and really wanting to create greater safety for the community. And so, yes, we've experienced quite a bit of it. And I wrote an article called Who Owns the AAPI Brand? And it really was focused on the idea that for the longest time, the Asian community, because it was so diverse, there's, I think, over 30 communities and over 50 languages spoken, that it was difficult to brand the community because there wasn't really one universal voice and it was multifaceted. But because we didn't brand ourselves, others stepped in and branded us. And unfortunately, the branding that was used was oftentimes racial, stereotypical, and there were oftentimes slurs and things that, quite frankly, weren't very flattering to the community. And so, in order to combat that, one, we needed to come together, which is what happened when we formed the Asian American Foundation. And the second thing is that we need to promote great stories and great heroes of the Asian community to really celebrate and to really then brand the community with these great heroes and these great stories. And so that's exactly what the podcast is trying to do, is really highlight some of these great heroes and some of their personal journeys and stories.
Well, Soon, thanks for coming on today. Where can people find out more about you?
Sure. Visit my website. It's soonyu.com. It's SOONYU.com. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited to have been on your podcast. Thank you so much, Charles, for all the stuff you're doing in terms of bringing great, I think, people to the audience.
Here's the website for people in the book, Iconic Advantage. Thanks to you, Soon, for coming on. Catch you next time.